The girl came bound in rope and bleeding from the nose. A June storm crawled in behind her, hushing the prairie grass and driving cattle into clusters like the sky itself held its breath. She was no older than 15, barefoot and stiff-backed despite the bruises across her neck. Her belly, already rounding with a quiet insistence, made the ranch hands look away as the stepfather presented her like a mule for barter. "She's stubborn," the man said, hitching his belt, "but sound, strong hips. Carryin' near 6 months." Across the dry yard stood Sila's Cade, whose land reached from the silvered cottonwoods along the Blanco to the distant bones of Mesa Diablo. Sila's had built his empire from limestone, sweat, and borrowed sins. Now in his 40s, he owned more cattle than he could name, more land than he could ride, and more silence than any man ought to bear. He studied the girl like one might a wounded animal, wary, not cruel. "What's your price?" he asked the stepfather. The man spat. $60 cash, and a rifle if you got a spare. "Her mama's dead, and I don't feed bastards." Silas said nothing at first. He just stared, then turned to the foreman, nodded once, and walked back toward the house. The girl's rope was cut by someone else's knife. The stepfather left with a bottle and a box of shells, never glancing back. That night rain came hard and cold. The girl sat on a stool by the kitchen hearth, her dress stuck to her legs, her eyes following no one. She hadn't said her name. Silas asked once, she didn't answer, and he didn't ask again. She was given the corner room on the second floor. No lock on the door, no bars on the window. Just a cot, a cracked wash basin, and a single-drawer dresser with a broken handle. She didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't speak. The housekeeper, an old Mexican woman named Alma, fed her stew and warm milk. "You sleep, Nina." Storm's gone. She did sleep, but not long. At dawn she was outside, barefoot again, standing near the cattle pens like she belonged to nothing. The men gave her wide space. Even Boone, who'd fought in Kansas and had 3 brothers dead to Apache blades, said there was something wrong in the girl's silence. Silas watched from the porch. A man like him didn't traffic in sentiment, but something about the girl needled under his ribs. She didn't ask why she was bought, didn't protest her place, but she kept her back straight and her gaze level. By the week's end, she had cleaned the tack room, stitched 2 shirts, and pulled a breech calf without being told. Boone tried to push her away when she approached the heifer mid-labor. She shoved past, reached in with small hands slicked in blood, and yanked life into daylight. She named the calf Ruth. That was when Silas learned the girl's name, Miriam. Miriam didn't speak of what came before, only that her mother had died last winter and her stepfather took to whiskey. Alma asked once about the child's father, and Miriam answered, "Not him," with such flatness that no one asked again. She moved through the ranch like a ghost growing flesh, learning every task without complaint. She fetched water, carried feed, boiled lye for laundry. The men started leaving scraps for her near the cook stove, and one of them gave her a worn-out hat that she never took off. It shadowed her eyes and made her look older than she was. Silas began to find his routines altered. Where he once rode out alone to check the north fences, he now found Miriam waiting near the corral, cinching a saddle wordlessly. She never asked permission, just joined him, always 2 paces behind. She watched the land with the same stillness he did. She could spot broken wire before he did. Once, she raised a hand to halt him. There was a rattler in the brush. "You see things," he said once. She nodded. "I listen." The baby grew. By August, her gait had slowed, but she refused to stop working. Silas told her to rest. She said, "Idle hands make weak minds." He didn't argue. It was a dry season. Fires took 2 barns to the east. A settler couple was found shot in their wagon, baby strangled beside them. No one trusted the lawmen out of Blanco. People said the Comanche were riling again, but Silas knew the marks of white killers. Still, he kept the ranch tight, Men bunked close, rifles loaded, lanterns trimmed low at night. Miriam slept with a knife under her cot. One night Alma found her outside, barefoot in the dust, belly full and eyes wide. "I heard them," Miriam whispered. Alma said, "Who, child?" Miriam touched her belly. "Both." Silas stood behind the window, listening. At the first frost, the child came, a boy, fierce and red-faced, howling from the start. Miriam bled too long, clenched her teeth through the pain, and refused the whiskey offered. She named the boy Elias. Wrapped him in a feed sack and sang to him in a language none of them knew. Silas held him once, awkwardly. Elias gripped his finger. The strength of it startled him. "You want the child?" he asked her days later. Miriam looked at him as if he were stupid. "He's mine. Then he'll stay." They didn't speak of what bound them, money, survival, blood, but something else had begun to thread between them, quiet and undeniable. A strange kinship, maybe. Or the slow turning of fates neither of them understood yet. Miriam was no longer just a girl sold for a rifle, and Silas Cade was no longer just a man made of land and cattle. There was something brewing in the dust between them. Something neither could name. Spring returned like a forgotten promise. The mesquite bloomed late, bees thick in the air, and the river ran higher than it had in 2 years. Elias took to crawling with a vengeance, dragging himself through every open door and patch of sun. He screamed when left alone, but laughed when Alma sang or when Boone let him tug on his mustache. Miriam moved with more weight now, not in body, but in presence. She stitched herself a new dress from flour sacks and trimmed it with buttons she scavenged from old coats. She walked with her shoulders square and her eyes unblinking. One of the younger hands called her Miss Cade once, half in jest. The name stuck. She rode the perimeter daily with Silas, rifle across her lap, Elias tied to her back in a repurposed saddle blanket. She asked questions now about fences, irrigation, taxes. Silas answered in clipped words, but he answered. She learned fast, absorbing knowledge like a sponge laid on dry stone. "She's setting herself to inherit," Boone muttered once, half laughing. "She's setting herself to survive," Alma answered. Trouble came in the form of a letter, folded twice, sealed in wax, carried by a boy who didn't wait for a reply. Silas read it on the porch with the brim of his hat low and his jaw tight. Miriam watched from the shade. He folded the letter and burned it in the basin. "What was it?" she asked later. "Nothing worth speaking of." But 3 days later he rode out at dawn with 2 rifles and 4 days' food. He left her a list. It wasn't a note of affection or explanation, just instructions for hay rotation, payroll, and where the good silver was buried if something happened. It was the closest thing to trust he'd ever offered. He was gone 10 days. On the 11th, a man rode in from the north, not a lawman, not a neighbor. Young, slick-shaven, coat too fine for the dust. He asked for Cade. When told Silas was gone, he looked at Miriam and smiled like he recognized her. "Then I'll wait," he said. "He won't mind." She didn't offer him a bed. He pitched camp near the barn, cooked beans over a stingy fire, and stared too long when she walked by. That night she went to Alma and asked for laudanum. "For Elias," Alma asked. "For the man," Miriam said. On the 3rd night the stranger drank with Boone. On the 4th he tried to touch Miriam's braid as she passed. She turned and slammed her fist into his throat, dropped him to the dirt. Boone laughed, then stopped laughing when the man pulled a blade. She stepped back, calm. "You want your fingers, you put that away," she said. The man did slowly. But the smile stayed. Silas returned the next afternoon, weary and blood-spattered. His horse was lamed, and he walked it the last mile. When Miriam saw him coming, she put Elias in Alma's arms and stood at the gate. "You leave again without saying why," she said. "I'll assume you're dead and act accordingly." He didn't answer, just dismounted with a groan. She took the reins and walked beside him. The stranger was gone by nightfall. No one saw him leave. Miriam began carrying the ledgers. She added her initials beside purchases, traced the slope of debt against yield. She corrected Silas's arithmetic once. He stared at the column, then at her. "You want the place?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You could take it." Still, she said nothing. But that night she locked the feed stores and wrote her own rotation plan. Boone started reporting to her. The first year passed with no celebration, just dry wind and low stars. Miriam turned 16, maybe 17. It was hard to know. Her mother had kept no records. Silas began aging all at once. His right hand trembled sometimes. He let Miriam sign the contracts for cattle drives. Once she rode into Blanco alone, hat low, Elias strapped to her chest. She met with the bank, the grocer, and the blacksmith. The men there didn't call her girl, they called her Miss Cade. On the way back, she spotted riders in the arroyo. 4 of them lean and mean-eyed. She rode past slow, hand on the rifle. One whistled. She stopped. "You got business, you speak it now," she said. They watched her like wolves measuring a gate. "We heard a little whore got rich," one said. She didn't speak, just stared. "You her." She spat in the dust. "Come see." They didn't follow. She rode home faster than usual, didn't tell Silas. It was a dry summer again. Fires rolled across the hill country. A cousin of Boone's was shot west of Mason, pockets turned out. Miriam set double watches. She made Alma sleep inside the main house. She began teaching Elias to hold a knife, even though he could barely walk. "Too young," Silas said once. "I wasn't," she answered. That ended the discussion. One morning a man came limping through the field, hatless, mouth full of blood. His coat was torn and one arm hung like cooked rope. Miriam met him with a rifle. "I got a name," he gasped. "I was sent." "By who?" He said nothing, collapsed in the dust, died before sunset. Silas burned the body. Miriam dug the man's pockets and found a coin with a hawk stamped in gold. "That's cavalry," Silas said. "No regiment I know," Boone added. Miriam said nothing. That night she sat long by Elias' crib, knife across her lap, eyes fixed to the open window. Change came slow, like a tide that never went out. By the second year, Miriam oversaw the butchering, the breeding, the branding schedules. Men answered to her without blinking. The ranch ran cleaner, leaner, more profitable. Silas stayed back more, drinking tea instead of whiskey, watching Elias with a strangeness that almost resembled awe. Sometimes he looked at Miriam the same way. "You ever wonder why I bought you?" he asked one night, voice gravel-soft. "No," she said. "I thought you might be a kind of penance." She looked at him, long and unsmiling. "I'm not here to fix you," she said. He nodded. "Good." They said nothing else, but he left his will in her dresser the next morning. She didn't touch it. Not yet. The frost came early the third year. Snow clung to the shadowed edges of the pasture, and the cattle groaned low in the dark. Miriam rose before sunup, boots stiff with ice, cloak too thin across her shoulders. She split wood herself, fed the stove, dressed Elias in wool patched from an old saddle blanket. He was walking now, saying words too old for his face. He called Silas, sir. He called Miriam, ma. Silas never corrected him. Letters began arriving in pairs, all bearing the same seal, a coiled rattlesnake against a black field. Miriam burned the first few, then one came addressed to her. Inside was no message, only a dried iris petal pressed between 2 pages and a line inked in slanted hand. "Blood remembers," she showed Silas. He read it once, then folded it carefully. "You recognize it?" she asked. He shook his head too quickly. "Liar," she said. "I knew men who used those marks. Long before you were born. Then they remember you." He said nothing more, but Miriam saw how he cleaned his rifles that night. Saw how he stood longer than usual at the window, watching the road. They came in spring. 3 riders, coats too clean, saddles too fine. They didn't ask for names, they just stopped outside the gate, sat quiet atop their horses, and waited. Miriam came out with Elias on her hip and Boone flanking her, shotgun across his back. One of the men smiled. "Miss Cade," he said. She didn't answer. "We're looking for a man stole something once, thought he could bury it out here in dust and cattle." Silas stepped onto the porch. He didn't speak, just met the man's eyes. There was a long silence. The air between them tightened like wire. "We'll be back," the man said. "Dust don't keep secrets forever." They turned and rode slow, like they owned time. That night, Silas told her the truth. He once run with a claim-jumping outfit in the New Mexico territory, young and broke and cold with ambition. They found a vein of gold near Carrizozo, killed the surveyors who marked it, and buried the evidence under false deeds. Only Silas walked away clean, with the maps and the names of the dead. He used that blood money to buy the Blanco land, bit by bit, until he owned enough to rewrite his past. "They were killers, all of them," he said. "And I was worse, 'cause I thought I was smarter." Miriam didn't speak, just rocked Elias slow and steady. "They'll come back," he said. "I know," she answered. Miriam gathered the men. Boone, the twins Tom and Eli, Hector the tracker, and Alma. She laid it out straight. "They want Silas. They'll come at night. We stand or we lose everything." Boone looked at her. "You sure it's worth bleeding for?" She met his stare. "You asking if I'd trade this land for one man?" He said nothing. "I wouldn't," she said, "but I'd trade it for what I made it, and I made this mine." That was the only answer he needed. They set traps in the gullies, rigged bells along the fence lines. Boone took the ridge. Hector tracked the dry creek. Miriam slept in her boots with a shotgun across her lap. Elias woke screaming 2 nights in a row. Each time she calmed him without a word. Each time she stayed by the window until morning. When the attack came, it wasn't thunderous. It was quiet. A match struck, a lantern lit, a barn went up like kindling. Boone fired first. One man dropped screaming into firelight, then silence again, then hoofbeats. Miriam was already at the gate, rifle up. Alma stayed with Elias in the cellar, knife clutched in both hands. 2 riders came hard, one with a saber, one with a scattergun. Miriam knelt behind the water trough and aimed. The first fell backward, neck blooming red. The second veered wide, hit a wire snare, flipped like a ragdoll into cactus. Silas took a round through the shoulder but kept shooting. Eli bled out behind the cookhouse. Tom lost 2 fingers. By dawn, 5 men lay dead. 2 horses ran off, wounded and riderless. One man was caught in the barbed wire, still alive, hissing curses. Miriam knelt beside him. "You came for gold," she said. He grinned through blood. "Not just gold, her father. He was one of ours. Called it honor, setting it right." "Whose father?" she asked. The man choked. "Yours." She stared at him a long time, then slit his throat. She buried the dead herself, spade in hand, sweat cutting through soot. Silas watched from the porch, arm bound, face pale. "You knew?" she asked when the last grave was filled. "I suspected." "About my father." He nodded. "Why didn't you say?" "You weren't ready." She stood, hands covered in black earth. "I was born ready." That night she sat by the fire with Elias asleep on her lap. Silas poured them each a cup of tea. Outside, the ranch smoldered and the men slept with rifles at their sides. "You could leave," Silas said. "Take the child. Go east, start clean." She didn't answer. "You're young." She looked him full in the face. "No, I'm old, just not dead yet." He smiled for the first time in weeks. Then he said, "What if I told you the gold still buried here? That the map hidden in the beams of this house?" She raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't care," she said. "Why not?" Because I already took everything worth having. And in the silence that followed, they both understood. Blood made her. Fire tempered her. But what she became, what the land answered to now, was hers alone. By summer, the ranch had healed. Grass pushed up through the scorched earth near the old barn, and a new calf suckled beneath the shadow of a rebuilt fence. The men worked quieter than before, not out of fear, but reverence. They knew now who ran the place. It wasn't Sela's Cade, and it wasn't luck. Miriam kept the old knife tucked in her boot and rode with Elias tied to her back again, just like before he could walk. He'd grown restless in the cradle, always reaching for her rifle, always asking why the sky was so wide. She never gave easy answers. She believed in silence as a kind of shield, the way her mother once had. The name Cade carried weight now. Merchants tipped their hats in Blanco. The banker sent word once a month asking if she'd consider a seat on the landowners' council. She didn't reply. Then came a letter, carried by a man on foot. No seal this time, just a name she hadn't heard in years, Lillian. She rode alone, told no one, left Elias with Alma, said she'd be back by dusk. Took the gray mare with the smooth gait and the pistol Silas once kept in a Bible box. The town was called Reedswitch, nothing more than a saloon, a church with no roof, and a boarding house that leaned sideways. Miriam tied the horse and walked in like she'd never left the world behind. No hat, no cloak. Just the girl who'd once been sold, now grown into something harder than bone. Lillian waited inside the saloon. She was older, face marked with lines that told more than years could. Her dress was fine, too fine for the dust. She wore gloves even in the heat. "Sister," she said. Miriam stood still. "I didn't know I had one." "You didn't," Lillian answered, "but we had the same mother." They talked in the back room. Lillian poured whiskey, drank hers fast. Miriam didn't touch the glass. "She left me in San Antonio," Lillian said. "Married your father, never wrote again. I found out about you when I saw a flyer, some trader in Blanco blabbing about a girl with a knife and a ranch worth dying for." Miriam watched her. "You came for money." "I came for blood. You think I don't know what it cost to build that place?" Miriam said nothing. Lillian leaned forward. "I've got names, men still breathing who were there when your father was taken. One of them's got a mine in Durango. Another runs horses down in Sonora. You want them?" Miriam stared at her hands. "Why now?" "Because it burns me, knowing she raised you, knowing he died for nothing." "She didn't raise me," Miriam said. They sat quiet a long time, then Miriam stood. "Give me the names." Lillian handed her a list, handwritten on parchment folded 3 ways. "I want nothing," she said, "but I had to see you." Had to see what she left me for. Miriam walked to the door. "She didn't leave you," she said without turning. She ran. The first man on the list was a trader named Court Howell. She tracked him to a roadhouse north of Uvalde. He wore a silk cravat and dyed his hair, thought he was untouchable. She slit his throat in the bathhouse after he tried to offer her a bottle of wine. The second was trickier. Josiah Mears, ex-Union, now a horse runner with ties to some judge in Matamoros. She found him drunk outside a cantina, flanked by 2 women who looked no older than she had been. She didn't speak. Just shot him through the heart, then walked away. Each time she returned to the ranch, Elias ran to meet her. Each time she told Alma to boil water, clean the knives. And each time Silas sat waiting by the hearth, pretending he hadn't heard what she'd done. "You mean to erase the whole list?" he asked once. She didn't answer. "I know what it means to chase ghosts." She looked at him. "Then you know I won't stop." The third name, Donovan Pike, was harder. He lived behind a locked gate near Del Rio, guarded by ex-convicts and bastard sons. She waited 3 days, watching, mapping the shift of men and rifles. On the fourth night, she climbed the ridge and shot the lanterns one by one. When they came out shouting, she fired twice more, caught Pike in the thigh and shoulder. He tried to crawl. She didn't let him finish a sentence. Just walked down, placed the muzzle against his eye, and pulled the trigger. She buried the pistol in the canyon on her ride back. Winter settled again. Elias turned 4, and the house filled with a kind of hush that came after long storms. Miriam moved slower, spoke less. Boone noticed the limp in her left leg, an old wound reopened. Alma treated it with poultice, warned her to rest. She didn't. One night, Silas laid a map across the table. Old paper, faded ink. "This is where I buried the rest," he said. "Gold, yes, but journals too, names." Miriam stared at the mark, deep in the Llano country, not far from where her mother once sang to her in a one-room cabin with a hole in the roof. "Why show me now?" she asked. "Because I won't live forever," he said, "and you already know too much to walk away." She took the map, didn't thank him, didn't need to. The blood that called her wasn't finished yet, not by half. The Llano Estacado stretched out like the broken back of a dying god, flat, cruel, and endless. Wind never stopped there. It whispered through the grass like secrets told too late. Miriam rode alone, the map folded beneath her coat, the mare breathing hard beneath her. She hadn't told Silas when she was leaving, hadn't left a note. Alma would understand. Elias would ask, and Boone would lie. The place marked on the map was a ridge of red stone above a dry arroyo. Nothing grew there except thornbrush and snakeweed. Miriam dismounted at dusk and walked the last stretch on foot, rifle over one shoulder, shovel strapped to her saddle. She found the cairn under a squat cedar twisted with age, just as he'd drawn it. It took 3 hours to dig. The earth fought her, thick with roots and rocks. Her hands bled through her gloves. At last the blade struck iron, a strong box, rusted but whole. Inside the gold gleamed like something cursed, but the papers were what mattered. She lit a lantern and read by its weak light, the wind tugging at the flame. Names, dates. Orders signed in blood. Her father's name appeared twice, once on a list of marked men, once in a letter addressed to the widow. The signature was a name she didn't know, Judge Wyman Glass. She burned the gold right there. Used oil and dry cedar, watched it curl and blacken, watched the wind scatter ash across the canyon like snow. Then she packed the documents and turned her horse east. It took 5 weeks to find the judge. He lived in a house of marble near New Orleans, 3 stories tall and full of gaslight. Guards at the gate, servants in livery. He presided over land disputes, rail contracts, and death warrants. A man who wore the law like a skin he never took off. Miriam posed as a courier, forged a seal, slipped through the gate just after dawn. Inside, she found walls lined with books and paintings of battles he'd never fought. A sword above the hearth, a wolfhound that growled when she passed. Wyman Glass sat at his desk, reading, spectacles on his nose, gray hair trimmed sharp. He looked up once, annoyed, then paused. He recognized something in her. Not her face, but the stance, the way her hand hovered near her coat. "You Cade's girl." "I'm Miriam." He nodded, calm. "So you read the papers." "I read enough." He took off his glasses, laid them down. "It was war," he said. "We made choices. You made corpses." He didn't argue, just leaned back in his chair. "You going to kill me?" "I thought about it. But you don't deserve it." His brow lifted. "No. No. I want you alive when it all burns." She dropped the folder on his desk. The real ledgers, not the fake Silas had shown her. Documents naming Glass in every false claim, every land theft, every dead man with a stake in silver. "They're going public," she said. He smiled thinly. "You think anyone will care?" "I think your sons will, your grandchildren." His eyes narrowed. "I want every parcel you stole returned," she said. "Every ranch, every well, every broken treaty. I want it in writing. I want it signed. You're just a girl with dirt under her nails. I'm the fire you forgot to put out." She walked out without another word. 2 days later, a package arrived at the Blanco Ranch. Inside, a deed, a bank draft, and a note with 2 words. "You win." Miriam didn't celebrate. She rode the land, checked the water lines, kissed Elias on the forehead each night without smiling. One evening, Silas found her on the porch, carving something into the rail with her knife. "You won," he said. She didn't stop carving. "No," she said. "I ended it. There's a difference." He nodded. "And what now?" "I raise him," she said, eyes on the horizon. "I keep the land clean. I make them remember." "Remember what?" "That I wasn't supposed to survive." They sat in silence a long time. The sun bled down into the mesquite. Nothing moved. And the wind carried no ghosts that night, only the scent of cedar and the hush of a land beginning to forgive. Spring rolled in soft that year. Wildflowers stretched across the hills like old wounds healing, bluebonnets first, then Indian paintbrush. The air smelled of dirt and beeswax and sweat. Miriam walked the fields at dusk, Elias' hand tight in hers. He no longer needed to be carried. He ran ahead now, fearless in the way only children of fire can be, the kind born in chaos and taught to stand before they could speak. Silas had taken to watching from the veranda, his left shoulder stiff from the bullet that never fully mended. His face had gone hollow, like something being slowly carved out from the inside. He'd started forgetting the names of some of the hands. Boone began handling payroll. Miriam didn't interfere, but she noticed. She saw everything. One evening, Alma brought her an old trunk pulled from the cellar, said it belonged to Silas's father, untouched since the war. Miriam waited until the house was quiet to open it. Inside, Confederate gray moth-eaten, a cavalry saber, a Bible with pages hollowed and packed with bills long since rotted. But beneath all that, she found a bundle of letters tied with rawhide, brittle with age. Most were in Silas's hand, unsent, addresses scratched out. Names she didn't know: Thomas Cade, Elias Cade, Mary Witt. She read every word. They were apologies, confessions, weakness poured into ink by a man too proud to speak them aloud. One caught her. "I bought a girl once, thought I was doing her a kindness, but she changed the shape of me. Broke the rot clean off my bones. She's not my daughter, not by blood, but if she buries me on this land, it'll be more honor than I earned." Miriam sat still for a long time. Then she burned the letters, not to erase him. To protect what he'd become. Trouble always returns. The land makes no promises. It came this time in the form of a railroad man named J.H. Emmons. He arrived with clean boots and a handshake too firm. Said he was with Central Texas and Rio Grande, looking to partner with key landowners. Said progress. Said mutual benefit. Miriam didn't shake his hand. "You're here for the water rights," she said. Emmons smiled like a wolf in church. "Just want to run a spur line through that pass y'all ain't using. Little compensation. Maybe build a depot. Folks'll thank you." "I'm not a folk. I'm not asking." "Then we're done." She turned to go. He caught her wrist. Boone had him on the ground before the next breath. Miriam leaned close. "This land's seen worse men than you," she said, "and it buried everyone." Weeks passed. Emmons didn't return, but strange riders began crossing the east fence. Questions asked in blanco. A survey team camped just outside the property line, pretending they'd gotten lost. Miriam put Elias to sleep with a knife under his bed and her shotgun by the door. "Again?" Silas asked one night, his voice thinner than she'd ever heard it. "Always," she said, "but there's no more blood left to spill." She looked at him. "There's always more," she said. That's what you never told me. The attack came under cover of lightning, not fire this time, dynamite. They hit the north fence, blew it wide, ran horses through to trample the crop beds. Boone was shot in the leg. Hector's dog was killed outright. Alma barely escaped the bunkhouse before it collapsed in smoke, but Miriam had planned for this. She buried 2 charges of her own beneath the pass road. When Emmons and his men came riding back to finish it, she lit the fuse with a calm hand and watched the ridge collapse. 5 men dead, 1 crippled, the others scattered. In the smoke, she found Emmons alive, pinned beneath stone, half his face peeled away. She knelt beside him. "You should have come as a buyer," she said, "not a thief." He gurgled something. She slit his throat before he could finish. They rebuilt the fence, bled the cattle, tended the wounds. Miriam didn't sleep for 3 nights. When she finally did, it was under the stars with Elias curled against her side and a rifle laid across her knees. The prairie sang to her then, not in peace but in recognition. She had become what the land required. Silas died quietly 3 weeks later, in his chair, by the window, looking toward the range. Miriam found him before dawn, covered his body with a blanket, didn't cry. She buried him beneath the twisted oak on the ridge, the same one she used to ride past on her way to nowhere. Elias helped carry the shovel. Boone said the prayer, no marker, just stone. She spoke only once at the grave. "He was my first weapon." Afterward, the ranch changed again. She tore down the old sign, painted a new one with her own hand, Cade and Son. The boy was 5. He already knew how to gut a rabbit and load a rifle. But Miriam didn't teach him vengeance. She taught him boundaries. She taught him when to raise a fence and when to burn it down. Years passed like wind through a canyon, sharp, constant, never the same twice. Grass grew tall over old graves. Calves were born, cattle driven, fences mended and broken again. The house changed shape. Elias got taller. His voice deepened. He spoke less, but when he did, people listened. Miriam watched him from the porch most evenings, boots on the rail, rifle still within reach. She had not softened, but she'd become quieter. Her strength no longer needed to announce itself. The land knew her now. It bent around her will. By the time Elias turned 12, she had taught him everything but mercy. Not because she lacked it, she'd simply never found it useful. He read maps, balanced books, kept pace with Boone on the range. Alma called him Hermano del Polvo, brother of dust. He looked like his father in the nose, but everything else was her. The posture, the silence, the eyes that never gave away their thoughts. He had not yet asked about the past, and she had not yet offered it, but it waited, like flint under dry grass. One morning, a rider came from San Marcos, not a threat, not a banker, not a drifter, a woman. She wore a blue dress, boots stitched with silver, and a wide hat that shadowed half her face. She said her name was Anthea and asked to see Miriam Cade. Her voice was strange, Eastern, but her manner was not. She didn't blink much. "I heard what you did," Anthea said, "back then." Miriam offered no seat, no grating. "Who are you to hear such things?" "My mother was on that claim, Carrizozo. She was the only one who lived. They left her for dead." Miriam narrowed her eyes. "Then you know what Glass did." "I know what they all did," Anthea said. "I know what you did." Elias stood behind the screen door, watching. She didn't tell him to leave. Anthea stepped closer. "I don't want vengeance. I want help." Miriam's voice dropped. "Why?" "There's still more. Not all of them died. One of them, Wexler, is running land through the courts. Stole 2 pueblos outside Santa Fe. He's protected. Money, rail, law." Miriam looked toward the field. "I'm done," she said. "You're not," Anthea replied. "You just think you are." That night Elias spoke. "She's telling the truth." "I know," Miriam said. "She looked at you like a sister." "She looked at me like a weapon." He didn't speak again for a long time. Then what if she's both? Miriam didn't answer. She thought of all the graves, the flames, the ones she killed and the ones she let live. The map buried again in the floorboards, the ledger that still held 3 unmarked names. She left at dawn. No saddlebag, no letter, just a rifle and the horse with the cracked hoof. Anthea rode beside her. Elias stood by the fence, fists clenched. "I'll come back," she said. "Bring the truth," he said, "not pieces." She nodded, then rode into the rising light. Santa Fe was crawling with new money and old blood. Wexler kept a mansion just above the plaza, guarded by Mexican pistoliers and Pinkerton men fat off cattle pay. But Miriam knew how to move without being seen, and Anthea knew the windows. They struck on the 7th night, knives first, then powder. No one screamed. Miriam found Wexler in a velvet chair, half asleep, half drunk. He tried to stand. She shot him in the kneecap. "You know who I am," she said. He nodded, sweating. "Then you know this isn't for me." "For who?" he gasped. She took out a folded picture, one of her father, young and proud, standing in front of a tent marked with cavalry stars. "For the people you buried, and the ones you never saw." She shot him once in the chest, once in the throat. Anthea lit the house. They rode west after that, not in retreat, but in silence. For 3 days they didn't speak. On the 4th, Miriam asked, "You got people?" Anthea nodded. "Not anymore, but I've got land and memory." "You going back?" "Yeah." Miriam nodded. "Good." They parted near the Picos. No promises, no thanks, just blood returned to blood. When Miriam came home, Elias was waiting on the porch. She looked older. The wind had stripped her soft edges, left only stone. "You bring the truth?" he asked. She nodded. He took the rifle from her hands and set it down gently. She pulled the old ledger from her coat, opened it, drew a line through the last name. "Now it's ours," she said. He looked at her. "It always was." They stood in silence until the moon rose. No fences could hold them now, no graves left to dig. Only a boy and a woman, and the land that had once buried them both, and now bore their name.